Hi and Assalamualaikum everyone. I hope you have settled down in Espa, and this will officially be our first lecture for the semester. So we'll be covering topic 1, which is a view of life. It is also in chapter 1 of your meta textbook. Okay, this is the book that we'll be using for this semester and also for next semester. Okay, so this is our lecture outline. We have 4 subtopics, which is the first one is characteristics of life, and then we go on into evolution and the classification of life, and then we go on to the process of science, and the last one is the challenges facing science in our everyday world. Okay, so the first subtopic is the characteristics of life. So what is biology? I always ask my students in the first class, what is biology? So biology is the scientific study of life. It is also the study of living organisms, which are divided into many spheres, many specialized spheres actually, that covers morphology, physiology, anatomy, behavior, origin, and also distribution. So there is a great diversity among living things in the world right now, in the biosphere. So although life is tremendously diverse, it may be defined by several basic characteristics. The basic characteristics are living things and non-living things. So living things are composed of the same chemical elements as non-living things, and they obey the same physical and chemical laws that govern everything in the universe. Okay, so this figure illustrates the major groups of living organisms. So the first one, we have the bacteria. Okay, so what are bacteria? They are widely distributed. They are microscopic organisms with a very simple structure. And then we have the protists. In the next, this photo here, we have the paramecium. So paramecium is an example of a microscopic protist. Protists are larger in size and more complex than the bacteria. So the rest of this, the other three organisms are large organisms, meaning we can see it with our naked eye. So they can be distinguished by how they get their food. So this is a a fungus here. This one here. This is a fungus that digests its food and externally. And the next, this photo here is the sunflower. It's a photosynthetic plant that makes its own food, and an octopus, the last one, is an aquatic organism that ingests its food like us. The complex organization of life begins with atoms, the basic units of matter. So atoms combine to form small molecules, which join to form larger molecules within a cell. Cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. It can be unicellular or also multicellular. So each level of organization builds upon the previous level and is more complex. So moving up the hierarchy, if you see the pyramid, each level acquires new emergent properties. Emergent properties is actually new unique characteristics that are determined by the interactions between the individuals. The organization of life begins with atoms. Atoms combine to form molecules. Molecules then join to form larger molecules within a cell. Similar cells combine together to form tissues, and tissues make up organs. Organs work together to form organ systems. An organism is formed when organ systems are joined together. So a species is a group of similar interbreeding organisms. A population is all the members of a species within an area. A community is a collection of interacting populations within the same environment. So an ecosystem is a community plus its physical environment. And then we have lastly is the biosphere. It is the zone of air, land and water where organisms exist. Living organisms cannot maintain their organization or carry on life's activities without an outside source of nutrients and energy. Food provides nutrients, which are used as building blocks for energy. Energy is the capacity to do work, and it takes work to maintain the organization of the cell and the organism. So when cells use nutrient molecules to make their parts and products, they carry out a sequence of chemical reactions. This is termed as metabolism. It comprises of all the chemical reactions that occurs in a cell. So the ultimate source of energy for nearly all life on Earth is the sun. Okay, so plants and certain other organisms are able to capture solar energy and carry on photosynthesis, which is a process that transforms solar energy into chemical energy of organic nutrient molecules. So all life on Earth acquires energy by metabolizing nutrient molecules made by photosynthesizers. So this applies even to plants themselves. So the energy and chemical flow between organisms also defines how an ecosystem functions. So within an ecosystem, chemical cycling and energy flow begin when producers, so like here such as grass, so producers take in solar energy and inorganic nutrients to produce food by photosynthesis. Chemical cycling occurs as chemicals move from one population to another food chain. So until death and decomposition allow inorganic nutrients to be returned to the producers once again. Okay, so energy on the other hand flows from the sun through plants and the other members of the food chain as they feed on one another. So the energy gradually dissipates and returns to the atmosphere as heat. So because energy does not cycle, ecosystems could not stay in existence without solar energy and the ability of photosynthetic organisms to absorb it. So energy flow and nutrient cycling in an ecosystem climate largely determine not only where different ecosystems are found in the biosphere, but also what communities are found in the ecosystem. So for example, deserts exist in areas of very minimal rain, right? So while forest requires much rain. So the two most biologically diverse ecosystems, which is the tropical rainforest and coral reef, occur where the solar energy is most abundant. To survive, it is imperative that an organism maintain a state of biological balance, or we call it as homeostasis. So for life to continue, we need to have a temperature, moisture level, acidity, and also other physiological factors. It must remain within the tolerance range of the organism. So this is maintained by a system called homeostasis that monitors internal conditions and make routine and necessary adjustments. So organisms have intricate feedback and control mechanisms that do not require any conscious activity. So these mechanisms may be controlled by one or more tissues themselves or by the nervous system. So let's say, I'll give you an example. So when you're studying and forget to eat lunch, your liver releases stored sugar to keep your blood sugar levels within the normal limit. So another example, I would say, such as in a lizard. A lizard may raise its internal temperature by basking in the sun. Also, it can be cooled down by moving into the shade. So living things also respond to stimuli. Living organisms interact with the environment as well as with other organisms. So the ability to respond often results in movement. Okay, for example, the leaves of a land plant turn towards the sun. Okay, and animals dart towards safety when there's danger or anything. So it often results in the movement. Living things also reproduce and develop. So life comes only from life. All forms of life have the ability to reproduce or make another organisms like itself. So in bacteria and protists, and all these other single-cell organisms, they go through a binary fission, for example. They simply split in two. While us, multicellular organisms, we reproduce. So by reproducing, we are pairing the sperm from one partner and the egg from another partner. So the union of the sperm and egg, followed by the many cell divisions after that, usually results in an immature stage which proceed through other stages, blastula, gastrula, morula, and all that, through stages of development or change to become an adult. So when living organisms reproduce, their genes or genetic informations are passed on to the next generation. Random combinations of sperm and egg, each of which contains a unique collection of genes, ensure that the offspring has a new and different characteristics. So in all organisms, the genes are made up of long DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid molecules. So DNA provides the blueprint or the instructions for the organization and metabolism of the particular organism. Living organisms have adaptations. So what is adaptation? Adaptations are modifications that make organisms better able to function in a particular environment. So for example, penguins are adapted to an aquatic existence in the Antarctic. An extra layer of downy feathers is covered by the short, thick feathers which form a waterproof coat. So layers of blubber also keeps the bird warm in cold water. So most birds have four limbs proportioned for flying, but penguins have stubby, flattened wings suitable for swimming. So their feet and tails serve as rudders in the water, but the flat feet also allows them to walk on land. So penguins also have many behavioral adaptations to living in the Antarctic. So if you see in the photo here, penguins often slide on their bellies across the snow. So this is in order to conserve the energy when moving quickly. They carry their eggs, one or at most two, on their feet where the eggs are protected by a pouch skin. So this also allows the birds to huddle together for warmth while standing straight and incubating their eggs. So from penguins to giant secretaries, life on Earth is very diverse. So because over long periods of time, organisms respond to ever-changing environments by developing new adaptation. So these adaptations are unintentional, but they provide the framework for evolutionary change. So evolution that comes in. Evolution includes the way in which populations of organisms change over the course of many generations to become more suited to their environment. So all living organisms have the capacity to evolve, and the process of evolution constantly reshapes every species on the planet, potentially providing a way for organisms to persist despite the changing environment. Despite diversity in form, function and lifestyle, organisms share the same basic characteristics. As mentioned, they are all composed of cells organized in a similar manner. Their genes are composed of DNA, and they carry out the same metabolic reactions to acquire energy and maintain their organization. So the unity of life suggests that they are descended from a common ancestor, which is the first cell or cells. Charles Darwin came to a conclusion that natural selection is the process that makes modification, that is, adaptation, possible. So during the process of natural selection, some aspects of the environment selects which traits are more apt to be passed on to the next generation. So this figure shows how the dietary habit of a deer might eventually affect the characteristics of the leaves of a particular land plant. So mutations fuel natural selection because mutation introduces variation among the members of a population. So let's take a look at this photo here. So a plant species generally produces smooth leaf. Here, all these are smooth leaf. But a mutation occurs that causes one plant here to have leaves that are covered with small extension of hairs. So the plant with hairy leaves has an advantage because the deer, which is a selective agent here, prefer to eat smooth leaf, not hairy leaves. So therefore, the plant with hairy leaves survives best and produces more seeds than most of its neighbors. So as a result, generations later, most plants of this species produce hairy leaves. Okay, next we go on into evolutionary tree of life. So an evolutionary tree is like a family tree. Just as a family tree shows how a group of people have descended from one couple, an evolutionary tree traces the ancestry of life on Earth to a common ancestor. So this here, the start of everything is the common ancestor, which are the first cells. So one couple can have diverse children, and likewise a population can be a common ancestor to several other groups, such as here, bacteria, archaea, and then we have the eukarya. Okay, so eukarya are cells with nucleus, while bacteria and archaea does not have a nucleus. So in this way, over time, diverse life forms have arisen. So evolution may be considered the unifying concept of biology because it explains so many aspects of it, including how living organisms arose from a single ancestor. Because life is so diverse, it is helpful to group organisms into categories. Use that by taxonomy. So taxonomy is the discipline of identifying and grouping organisms according to certain rules. Taxonomy makes sense out of the bewildering variety of life on Earth and is meant to provide valuable insight into evolution. Systemic is the study of the evolutionary relationship between the organisms. So DNA technology is now widely used by systematists to revise the current information and to discover previously unknown relationships between organisms. So several of the basic classification categories or taxa, going from the least inclusive to the most inclusive, are starting from species. Then from species we have the genus. After genus is family, and then is order, and then class, and we have phylum, and then kingdom, and then domain. So the least inclusive category, which is the species, is defined as a group of interbreeding individuals. So each successive classification category above species contains more types of organisms than the preceding one. So species placed within one genus share many specific characteristics and are the most closely related, while species, if placed in the same kingdom, share only the general characteristics with one another. So this is the example of the levels of classification. So species we have here, we have the human and we have the corn. So species for human are Homo sapiens. And then the genus is Homo. The family is Hominidae, and then the order is Primates, and then it's in the class of Mammalia. The phylum Chordata is in the kingdom Animalia, and the domain is Eukarya, which is we all have a nucleus. And then the corn. Corn, the species name is Ziamase, and then the genus is Zea, and then the family is Poaceae, and the order is Commelinales, and the class is Monocotyledon, and the phylum is Anthophyta, is in the kingdom of Plantae, and the domain is Eukarya as well. Next, we go on to the domain. Current biochemical evidence suggests that there are three domains, which is the domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. So both domain bacteria and domain archaea may have evolved from the first common ancestors soon after life began. So these two domains contain the prokaryote, which lack the membrane-bound nucleus found in the eukaryotes of domain eukarya. However, archaea organize their DNA differently than bacteria, and their cell walls and membranes are chemically more similar to eukaryotes than to bacteria. So the conclusion is that eukarya split off from the archaeal line of descent. Prokaryotes are structurally simple but metabolically complex. So archaea can live in extreme habitats. They can live in aquatic environments that lack oxygen or are too salty, too hot, or too acidic for most other organisms. So perhaps these environments are similar to those of the primitive Earth, and archaea are the last evolved form of life as the name applies. So bacteria are variously adapted to living almost anywhere, in the water, in soil, in atmosphere, as well as our skin and in our mouth, and also a large intestine. Okay, so this is the example of the domain archaea. We have the sulfur lovers. Is prokaryotic cells of various shape. It can adapt to extreme environments. It can absorb or it can chemosynthesize the food. It has a unique chemical characteristics. Next, we have the domain bacteria, which is prokaryotic cells of various shapes. So this is an example of the E. coli, which is a bacteria. It can adapt to all environments. It can absorb, it can photosynthesize or chemosynthesize the food, and it has a unique chemical characteristics as well. And then we have the last domain, which is the domain Eukarya. So it consists of kingdom Protista, the kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and also the kingdom of Animalia. So for example, in the kingdom Protista, we have the Paramecium. We have the algae, we have protozoans, we have slime molds, and also water molds. Okay, in Plantae, we have the algae, mosses, ferns, conifers, and also flowering plants. In kingdom Plantae, their organisms mostly photosynthesize food and are usually multicellular. So domain Eukarya for kingdom fungi usually consists of molds, mushrooms, yeast, and ringworms. They're mostly multicellular filaments with specialized complex cells, and they absorb their food. For kingdom Animalia, for example, we have the sponges, worms, insects, fish, frogs, turtles, birds, and mammals. They are multicellular with specialized tissues containing complex cells, and they ingest their food. So biologists use binomial nomenclature to assign each living organism a two-part name called a scientific name. So for example, we have here the Homo sapiens, which is human. So the first word is the genus. So this Homo is a genus, while the second word is the species designation. So this is the species and usually written in lowercase. So the first genus word has to be capitalized, the H here. Okay, so both of these words have to be in italic. Okay, if you see here, Homo sapiens, all scientific name has to be italic. Okay, so that is the end of our subtopic 1 and 2. We will continue with subtopic 3 and 4 in the next lecture. Bye.